about, the board had established that the bonds that are funded with payroll tax dollars or operating resources could not exceed 7.5% of operating revenues. We're actually at about 4.5%. So we're well under the board target with overall payroll tax funded debt. All our other debt is secured with federal grants, where we really have, it's only for debt. We could not use that to buy buses or do anything else with. So,
Good questions. Director Crosby.
I'd like to explore a little bit more about the payroll tax projections. We are using a much more aggressive assumption this year than we did last year. You mentioned, the growth of the economy, but I wonder if you can go a little bit more detail about where you got the data, what gives you confidence that this projection you're using now is more accurate than it was last year. And kind of in here too, if you could also talk about, I know the state economists have put out state level projections in terms of activity. How does this coordinate with that?
Our payroll tax forecast is based on the Eco Northwest forecast they do for us every fall. So these numbers come directly from that forecast. I agree with you, they are significantly more aggressive. We talk about three components of that payroll tax, well, really four components of payroll tax growth. So there's the rate increase, which accounts for about 1.4% growth is just due to the rate increase. But if you look at the underlying growth in payroll taxes, we're assuming a 7.2% growth. And if you break that into its components, you really have inflation, wage inflation, and we're assuming, or ECO forecasted 3.8% growth in wage inflation. I'll come back to that in just a second. The other is employment growth, where they forecasted a 3.1% growth in overall employment, and then what the economists call productivity. So real wage growth above CPI is at 0.3%. The inflation assumption in the ECO forecast is where there's the major difference from the state forecast, really. And I think there's a little bias with the economists that we use, Randy Pasvina, believing that Fed policy overall will be very inflationary, and that's coming into his model, and that view is not shared by all economists, in particular the state economist does not include as high of an inflation assumption. Really, again, this is, I think, why we feel the fund balance policy is really critical, in that if we have overshot, we have some time to draw down our fund balance policy and come back with an FY15 budget that would recognize those revenue shortfalls or potentially changes on the expenditure side.
Is the proposed contingency amount and fund balance amount sufficient to withstand more than one hit? Specifically, if the payroll tax estimate turns out to be too optimistic, if the Labor Relations Board rules the wrong way on the unfair labor practice on the binding arbitration, how much hit can those things cover some?
It could cover reasonable, it could cover both the loss on the labor front and the 2 or 3% reduction in payroll tax numbers. It probably even a little bit larger than that. Obviously, the larger it is, the larger the draw on fund balance, and the larger the changes we would have to propose for FY15. But we do believe it will be sufficient funds to get us through FY14 and still be able to not have a cash flow shortfall where we would have to borrow in the short run.
But does that set up a scenario where, we can get through 14, and I apologize for using this term because it is so overused, but then does that set us up for a cliff going into 15, and we have major readjustments that we have to do?
Well, a loss on the labor front does create a cliff. There's no way around that.
Following up on Director Prosser's question in regards to the aggressive look at payroll tax, we've all heard the sequestration talk, and we've talked about it here in regards to what are the potential impacts on us. But as we start to see some of these things go into effect, it was just announced recently that airports can lose their tower, their operating tower, or control tower. That affects me personally because I'm a pilot and I fly out of Troutdale. So if I can, if anybody's listening from the FAA, bring that back. But where it begins to take hold in our region is ultimately the peripheral effects of people losing their jobs. And essentially, as we see the ripple effect go through the communities, we'll see folks that don't have employment, which then affects small businesses in these regions, especially if we look at just the simple effect of the economic impact that Troutdale Airport has in that region. There are a lot of unanswered questions on what the impact's going to be, and financially, if those smaller companies that are pretty much the proverbial bread and butter of our communities will be able to survive and thrive. So that's a question that is yet to be answered, in my opinion, in regards to not so much the direct effect of sequestration, but the peripheral effect of many of those cuts that may appear small in some instances, but can be inequitably meted out on different communities. So that's something that when I see a payroll tax rate with that estimation with significant gain and what we're projecting, there's some concern there. So I don't really have a question, just most of the comment in that regard, but I'm not necessarily sure if we have the capacity to actually add all of that into our projections.
And the economic forecast we used probably did not really fit, because it was created last fall, did not really take into effect sequestration. There's very limited direct impact on TriMet from sequestration. Most of the operating federal grants we get are all funded from sections of MAP 21 that do not rely on general funds. They're coming from the Highway Trust Fund, so those programs aren't cut. And if you kind of look at the direct federal employment within our region, obviously the federal government, at Bonneville Power being probably the largest federal employer in the region, they don't pay the payroll tax. So we don't have even that direct impact. How it may impact the economy and be a drag on the overall economy, then that's the secondary impact that we might have.
And that's the concern, is the peripheral effect on private business that actually is benefited by federal employment in the area, or dollars that flow through, to the communities that employ folks that do pay the payroll taxes. And that's the peripheral effect that raises my concern in regards to if it's going to slow the overall growth of the economy that we've been seeing over the last 12 to 18 months.
Share that concern.
Dr. Bethel, you question, so you got her going?
We got it going, yeah. Just one question. I think at this point the others have been great in terms of response to the questions that I had and concerns. But let's talk a little bit and move to the Columbia River crossing. that's in the news and is going to be coming up, what kind of impacts are we looking at? And will we be able to sustain that in the light of a couple of things? Of course, what happens with the union, also the increase of the pension funding, and somewhere I read that we would hopefully be on track by 2031 to become breaking even. Is there any way that this would have an impact on that? And in terms of the pension breaking even, will we be able to reach that any earlier? And coupled with that, will the union loss, if that happens, affect that as well?
Well,
I'm going to wrap a lot of things in one question.
Right, and the good questions, each and every one of them. About the CRC, first of all, there's no net effect on the TriMet budget related to CRC. We do have 13 positions that are budgeted from our capital project area to assist the project, but they're fully reimbursed by the project itself. And as you know, there's no TriMet capital contribution at all to the CRC. So related to this budget, there's no effect on this budget related to CRC. Related to the pension, there's a whole series of calculations that are done by a separate firm related to the annual required contribution that we need to make to the pension plan. And those are all based on certain assumptions of how fast the portfolio will grow over time. And I think what we believe is that the assumption that has been used up to now is too aggressive. It was 7.75%. And we believe that needs to be reduced, I think, to about 7.25, if I recall.
That's what we've assumed in the budget.
Right. And so that then requires us to put in another, that annual required contribution will grow by about $4 million this year, and then another 2, so a total of $6 million in the budget next year. And it is something that I think we want to look at very carefully as we progress about the level of investment in that. I think we would all love to see us more even, if you will, before 2031 if we could. But this is the annual required contribution that should help bring the balances up at a reasonable level. But again, this is, we should probably do more, wish we could do more, but it's one of those things about what is the art of the possible and the balance between service on the street and actually this pension plan. And so we think this is a very responsible kind of midline approach at this point in time to take. So I hope that answered your question.
And I guess my only question would be, and you can answer this later when you get down looking to take action on this. What we're doing today is by no means the final decision on the budget. We've got more opportunities for people to provide input and frankly to learn a little bit more about settlements and decisions that may impact this budget. And even after the TSCC takes action, we have the ability to tinker with the budget. I think it's with 10% of the fund without having to go back to the TSCC for further action. So I think we do have an opportunity to address as these issues as we get smarter, and hopefully have some of these decisions coming back in the next month or so will allow us to incorporate these into the budget. But I do share the same concerns that we want to make sure that like last year we were accused of being too conservative in our estimates of the resources, and I'm glad you've taken a hard look at that. But I think you're hearing some pushback from the board that we're very worried that maybe we were a little too optimistic in this. So it'll be interesting to hear the comments and the suggestions from the people who testified. But I'm looking for that process to be able to get, and I guess that's what I'm saying, is make sure we incorporate some of these building blocks to the budget as we actually have, as actual decisions are being made up to the very final, locking and loading on the budget, which is now scheduled for the end of May, if I remember looking at the schedule. Okay. All right. So with that, unless there's further questions, I'm going to invite some people up to testify. So the first two, John Charles and Jared Franz. I saw them both out there. Morning, John. Jared.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is John Charles, President of Cascade Policy Institute. I've read through the budget and some related documents, and while I appreciate this chart, it's quite fascinating. I do believe It's a bit misleading. It suggests that there's a lull in the action, that where the hurricane was the calm before the storm for FY 2017, but in my opinion, that's only because of the decade-long practice of treating your pension funds and your OPEB funds as ATMs to withdraw and spend on all kinds of things that you shouldn't have been spending on. So you have more than $1.2 billion of unfunded actuarial accrued liability. The reason your budget is balanced today, the proposal, is because you're choosing again not to make any contributions to the OPEB trust fund. That's irresponsible. In other contexts, people doing that would be in jail. You're breaching your fiduciary trust. There is no calm before the storm. You're in the storm. My second point is that the budget narrative is kind of a magic act. It sort of calls your attention to one thing while doing another. Here, over and over, light rail is not the problem. Debt service is not the problem. Okay, well, on Wall Street, when some bank or someone like Enron says, we don't have a liquidity problem, everybody knows they have a liquidity problem. Okay, you need to be a little savvy here about what's said and not said in this budget. Okay, here's what management says. Light rail has only cost us 5% of construction costs since East Side Max. Well, that sounds soothing, only 5%. 5% of $3.7 billion is $183 million. That's money, that's actually a low estimate. My calculation is over $200 million that you've spent out of your general fund to build slow trains. Why? Of course that's part of your problem. Debt service. Staff expresses the issue soothingly in percent terms. You just heard from the CFO. Well, you're well below the 7.5% threshold. That's a percent, that's a number. What does it mean? You have a cash problem. Translate that. Senior lien debt for the FY14 budget that you're considering, just related to light rail, is about $18 million. You had a $12 million problem last year that you were sweating and bleeding on. $18 million, that's a nice thing that you would have been nice to have. Senior lien debt total since 2001 through 2014 is over $200 million. Senior lien money. That's money from your payroll taxes that goes directly into trust funds. You never even touch it. It goes up to pay off Wall Street bonds. That'd be a nice thing to have. And then here's a real sneaker. Page 38 of your fall 2012 financial assumptions report announces, for the first time that I'm ever aware of, in 2027, you'll have to float $327 million of senior lien debt issued because all your 40-year-old light rail cars have to be replaced, plus you have to buy 12 new ones at $6.8 million a vehicle. $327 million of bond debt, you'll finally be over your 7.5% problem. So the conclusion there is, for both capital and operating, your business model fails. You're in a free fall. And you're not doing anything about it. There's nothing significantly different here. I've been saying this every year for 5 years. You're not doing anything different. So you need to take some action. Actually, I think you need to shrink the district. You're never going to win any concessions at the contract table. And as of yesterday, partly through my doing, there's a bill dropped in the legislature, Senate Bill 826, that if it gets a hearing, you should actually be down there to testify in support, which would allow any jurisdiction within your district to leave the district at any time for any reason and prohibit you from raising the payroll tax on all the other people left in the district. You should shrink yourself. It's the only way to save yourself. Your employees are too expensive. They price themselves out of your market. And you should not be selling more revenue bonds. The construction program is ridiculous, and you should tell the governor, look him in the eye since he appointed you, and say the CRC project is absurd. It will increase your operating costs by $1.5 million. That wasn't said a few minutes ago, but it's in your budget statement. Why are you attempting to serve a whole other state that already has a great system when you can't even serve your current district? It's time for a huge leap here, a paradigm shift, to be cliche-ish, and what you have in front of you is not enough.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Any questions? Okay, Jared.
President Warner, members of the board, my name is Jared Franz. I'm the Law and Policy Associate at OPOL, and I'm transit dependent. 2 weeks ago, the GM and members of this board offered a public apology for TriMet's lack of transparency concerning the raises given to executives and administrative employees while they were pleading poverty and crisis to justify raising fares in the Portland metro region to the highest in the country. Now, as part of this apology, the members of this board pledged to do better moving forward. And I'm here today to tell you that it's your lucky day. You get to back up your words with action by not approving the budget that's in front of you right now, because it contains well over 100 inconsistencies and errors that commit the same kinds of sins against transparency that you just asked forgiveness for. Since I only have 3 minutes, and detailing all of these inconsistencies, errors would take all morning, I submitted only a tiny sample of the many that staff and Bus Riders Unite members have identified. So the first page of the document that I've given to you shows the proposed FY14 budget and the adopted FY13 budget for the Office of the General Manager. Now this is not at all intended as a personal attack on Neil or anybody else in that office. It's just simply a good example of some of the many irregularities that should concern the public. The first one, which I've highlighted in purple, is that the FY14 budget appears to show raises for non-union employees between FY11 and FY12. This is the period in which TriMet continues to claim that there were wage freezes for non-union employees. Now, examples of apparent raises can be found throughout the FY14 budget, and of course these historical figures may not have an impact on the current budget that's being discussed, but it's inconsistent with TriMet's public statements on past wages and at least deserves some kind of clarification. The second concern, which I've highlighted in green, is that the FY14 budget does not appear to accurately estimate the wages of some non-union employees. In the example I provided you, the general manager's estimated salary for the current year is $215,737. But the public knows from recent press releases that the GM's actual salary for the fiscal year is over $221,000. This type of inconsistency isn't just one that needs further explanation like the past salaries I've already pointed out. It needs immediate correcting before this board can approve the budget because it misrepresents current financial details to both the public and this board and makes comparisons with proposed future salaries difficult. And the third type of inconsistency, which I've highlighted in red because it's the most important, concerns erroneous representations of currently budgeted amounts for some expenses and in particular wages for non-union employees. Simply put, nearly all non-union wages listed in this proposed budget misrepresent what's actually in the FY13 budget. For example, the Director of Business Initiatives reported in this budget as having a budgeted salary of just over $109,000, but the actual salary that was adopted by this board and presented to the public in FY13 budget is significantly lower than that. Now, yes, I realize that this individual and the many, many others, employees whose wages were similarly misrepresented, probably benefited from raises given from the contingency fund that TriMet didn't properly disclose to the public, but the kind of wage increase should be reflected in the current estimates column and not in the column that's supposed to faithfully represent what's in the adopted FY13 budget. This error is a serious one because it falsely represents budgeted amounts and estimates amounts as consistent. It obfuscates things like the contingency raises that were given, and it suggests that many of the wages will not change between FY13 and 14. But this error is not just limited to wages. I'm almost done. The second page of the document shows the budgeted expenses for the Columbia River crossing. Now, the FY14 budget claims that $1.2 million were budgeted for the CRC last year or in this current year. The actual amount of money budgeted for CRC in the adopted FY13 budget is zero. It's zero. Anywhere you look in the FY13 budget, whether you're talking about requirements or resources, no public money was supposed to be spent on that project. So these errors and many, many more like it make the difference between the proposed FY14 budget and the adopted FY13 budget appear to be much smaller than they really are, and dramatically so in some cases. So this misrepresentation makes public accountability very difficult and fortifies the harmful reputation that TriMet has as an agency lacking transparency. So this board cannot approve the budget full of these errors, and a revised proposal is the least that the agency can do before advancing in the budget process. If you're serious about your recent public apologies and serious about transparency, this is the only meaningful option you have. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. All right. Questions? All right. Thank you.
I've got a quick question for Jared in regards to the comments that you were just making, and we do have your inconsistencies document here. Now, you were, in your prepared statement, you mentioned a number of times about the process and about the non-transparency of the organization and our budgeting possibilities and opportunities. How would you describe the process as you see it now in regards to being able to, I mean, if an organization was truly non-transparent, you wouldn't have the ability to do what you just did, which I told you last year, Jared. I think the work that you do is very good and thorough. So I greatly appreciate your eyes and ears taking a look at this. But how would you, so I'm trying to understand the claims that you're making in regards to the disconnect between what you're saying here, what's in the documents. Are you purporting that the information in the proposed budget is different than the actuals from 2013, different from the adopted? Walk us through kind of that your concept of how this budget doesn't meet what you're talking about.
So the proposed budget should show both what was in the adopted FY13 budget and what is expected at the end of the year. The expected column is difficult for anybody in the public to comment on because we don't have access to those numbers except in the few cases where actual salaries have been released to the public, and I highlighted one example of that. But the importance of providing the actual approved budget numbers from the FY13 budget is paramount for public transparency because the budget progression that is discussed in the budget is reduced when you inflate those numbers or do an ad hoc adjustment based on whatever else happened, creating an impression that some funds or some expenses in the FY14 budget are being increased very little or not at all in a lot of cases, when that's just simply not true. The approved budget numbers, or adopted budget numbers, are what the public had access to. It's what they believed TriMet was going to spend on certain things, and it explains partially why the public was so upset about executive raises. Now, I'm not here to talk about whether or not those raises were appropriate or what the level should have been or what. It's a question about transparency and process, and just telling the public really what's going on. And just sitting in the room today, it's already become a little apparent to me, or at least suggestive, that there's possibly more non-union wage increases put in this year's contingency because it's an amount that might not be known in advance. So the numbers are simply being carried through, telling the public that no raises, this is our budget, these are the numbers that are going to happen. And then at some future time, the raises will be given. Now, if they're deserved, I have no problem with that. That's fine. Let's have that conversation. But let's not do it in some secret room where the public doesn't get to see the decision.
One of the things that I'm trying to ascertain is, when people get frustrated, it's usually because expectations aren't met. And it's many times difficult to understand everybody's individual expectations. And that's something that we don't have the luxury of doing, when we have 100 million riders per year and, a couple million people across the region. That's no excuse, so don't take me for saying that's an excuse. Ultimately, though, the question, though, is the expectation of additional transparency. I mean, how do we get there? We, as a public organization, we're required to, make all of our financials public. All that information is public data. But what I'm sensing is I'm hearing some type of disconnect between the interpretation of that information and the actual information that goes out. I'm still trying to get to the gist of how do we meet expectations aside from what you're highlighting in the salaries. I mean, I think that's we hashed that a couple weeks ago. I'm not saying that's put to bed because it's raised your concern, but in the general sense, how do we as an organization meet those expectations of transparencies when you've got previous year's budget, you got current year's budget, you got previous year's actual, I mean, you've got all this data. Now, I fully understand and appreciate that not everybody can look at financial statements and read them. It's a tall task, and we don't need to hash it out here, but one of the things that, and I'll connect with you guys directly so that I can get a better understanding of what that looks like from a perspective of this transparency, concept. Because ultimately, a lot of this data is out there, but we still get hit with the same comment, consistently. There's a transparency issue. So again, I don't want to take up everybody's time. I know we have some more folks that want to testify, but I'd be very interested in sitting down with you and the rest of the folks over there just to say, what does that look like? So I can have a better understanding of what's that end goal that we're looking at. Begin with the end in mind, and the great words of the late Stephen Covey in his book, 7 Habits. So I appreciate your feedback and your comments and your work here.
I look forward to meeting with you and discussing those issues.
Excellent, thank you.
Director Bresser?
Budgeting is a complicated process. And there may be good explanations for why numbers have changed. And I don't know what happened here, this is the first I've heard of it. But for example, in reporting the current year budget, in this case 12-13 in the document, there is the original adopted budget, and that can be amended during the year, in which case it is entirely appropriate to show what that amended budget is. I don't know if that's the case here or not. As I said, I don't know going into the detail. I'm not willing to sit here and assume that these are all mistakes or all wrong without hearing from our financial officer. You said that you've spent a lot of time going through and looking and identifying these things. I would ask, if you would be willing to do so, to turn all that information over to Mr. Oxier, sit down with him, and I would very much appreciate at our next meeting to get a report back from you, Dave. Are these truly mistakes? Are they misunderstandings? Is it, how did this happen, and what do we need to do to move forward? And see where it lands.
And I would be happy to have that meeting.
Thank you, Jared. I appreciate it.
That's very good. My sentence exactly. Thank you very much. Okay, the next two, Hector Osuna and Even Moore. Tell me if I pronounce your first name correctly.
Yeah.
Okay. Hector? Good morning.
Hola, buenos días. My name is Hector Jr. Osuna. I am the lead bus organizer for Opal Environmental Justice Oregon and Bus Riders Unite. And first, I want to applaud you for your initiative of having this board meeting today here in Hillsborough, because it provides other transit riders with the opportunity of voicing their opinions here. Nevertheless, it is vital that you take into consideration the time that these board meetings occur at, because for many working class individuals and students, coming to a 9 o'clock meeting is almost impossible. Please don't forget that the role of a pioneer, of a leader, is to be creative and to take new initiatives that will demonstrate the legitimacy and uniqueness of your ideas, of your administration, of your governance, of our transportation system, and of our region. Now, I want to take you back in time to 2011. Opal Bus Riders Unite presented to the TriMet Board with our campaign for fair transfer, which the purpose was to extend transfer times to 3 hours and unlimited after 7 p.m. And we also presented to the board petition signatures from over 6,000 transit riders that have supported the campaign for fair transfer. And although a previous TriMet board member, Lair Bach, supported the campaign for fair transfer, he became frustrated due to the numerous attempts of preventing the campaign from appearing on TriMet's agenda or conducting a serious study of costs and benefits that didn't rely on ridership and service data from another era. So today, once again, Opal and Bus Riders Unite are presenting a solution and are demanding for you to restore to our transit system value. That's why I have provided a copy of the Campaign for Fair Transfer Ordinance of Bus Riders Unite that we have developed, and in it you will find that it demonstrates how easy this idea can become a reality. So on behalf of thousands of cash ticket and transit dependent riders, sorry doesn't get me to work. Sorry doesn't get me to school. Sorry doesn't get me to a doctor's appointment. Sorry doesn't get me to enough time to spend time with my family and friends. Sorry doesn't allow me to have the freedom and flexibility to live a happy, healthy, and productive life. So we, Opal Bus Riders Unite, have our hearts, mind, and doors open in order to collaborate and work with board and TriMet staff so we can have this ordinance or one like it be on the April board meeting agenda. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Hector.
So in June 2012, TriMet's management told us that our transit system was in a state of crisis. The board passed a budget that raised fares, cut bus lines, and socked away what we thought was a $20 million contingency fund. The decision was made in the name of current and future emergencies. It was a painful one for bus riders, to include the transit dependent, the unemployed, and the underemployed, many of whom don't have $100 for bus pass at the start of the month. Yet, at the same time, pay increases at TriMet were in the works, and nearly $1 million out of that so precious and so jealously guarded contingency fund went to increasing managerial salaries. Unlike the well-publicized costs of service and union benefits, these salary hikes went entirely unremarked. I can see why you wouldn't want to publicize that decision. It would not then, and does not now, sit well with people who were told that TriMet staff were suffering right along with the rest of us, that the contingency fund was inviolable. When our fares went up 20%, we didn't know that we were paying for a salary increase for someone who already earns over $100,000 a year, or more than twice the median household income in Portland. And that decision, I think, was a poor choice. The decision not to admit it was a worse choice. It illustrates a transparency problem at this agency. And you've hashed out, what might be an ongoing discussion about what exactly the information is that we need to see. But overall, I want to say that TriMet has no particular need for professional secrecy. It's a public agency whose stakeholders are transit riders and the taxpayers who subsidize operations. And yet the critical numbers that determine our level of service and the price that we pay and the choices that we're presented with are opaque. When TriMet makes its calculations, the results are delivered either in an oversimplified document for public consumption or in 300 inaccessible pages. The root numbers, the root assumptions, are either difficult to obtain, as the Oregonian can no doubt attest, or simply unavailable. So maybe you think that we're not really interested in the nitty-gritty. It's boring, Sure, most of us would rather not pore over the budget numbers, but we are interested in the million-dollar decisions, the decisions that direct discretionary spending to new construction at the expense of current service, the decisions that raise our fares so that top managers can get raises. And what exactly do you imagine the agency risks by making this information public? What you lose by withholding information is you lose the opportunity for a democratic transit system that meets the needs of the people who use it most. You lose the opportunity to learn from Bus Riders Unite, whose members have concrete proposals to improve the system that are informed by the experiences of actual transit riders and by the best budget information available to us. You lose the opportunity to acknowledge, correct, and learn from your mistakes. This board has the power to solve the transparency problem. You're responsible for TriMet's governance and can serve as much more than rubber stamp for its decisions, and I think you should require more of it. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. Keith Schultz, Vivian Satterfield.
Yes, Mr. Transparency right here. Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Keith Schultz from Gresham. You know me very well. You may have thought that I might not get all the way to Hillsborough from Gresham, and especially for such an early meeting, but I left my house at 6:30 this morning in order to make it, because I believe that sharing my feelings about our transit system is that important. I am a member of BRU, and as a user of the TriMet system for over 12 years, I have endured numerous fare increases and service cuts. I have a novel idea now. Give something back. Instead of being sorry, be better. We at BRU proposed over 2 years ago the campaign for a fair transfer. This is a way to give us something back for our patients. This is a way to turn your words into action. A way to restore some value to one of the most expensive transit systems in the nation that every year charges more for service but provides less. Extending transfers would be a simple keystroke away when you change to your new fare box ticket system in June. This would help to bring TriMet back to its former glory as the top transit system in the U.S. and a first step in giving transit riders like me a little bit more respect, a little bit more value for the expensive fares I have no choice but to pay. Not only is this a simple solution when fare box ticket machines are installed on buses, but longer transfers are more important than ever. Now that there is no zone system, that a person who travels only 3 miles for a quick errand like picking up groceries now has to pay the same as a person who travels 30 miles to work is the definition of an unjust system. While extending transfers for people will not help the majority of riders because they use the transit to get to work, it will make a meaningful difference in the lives of people who depend on transit. People like me. People who just need to make a short trip and can't afford a day pass for an errand that only takes a few hours. Extended transfers will make the system more fair for these riders, and the evidence from places like Minneapolis shows that it will increase overall ridership. It is a change that will cost TriMet a relatively insignificant amount of money in the very short term, but have very significant benefits for riders in both the short term and the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, President Warner and members of the board. My name is Vivian Satterfield. I'm the Associate Director at Opal Environmental Justice Oregon. I'm excited and honored to give my inaugural testimony this morning around a campaign that can truly restore value to a system that has not seen ridership increase for 10 years when adjusted for population growth. This isn't the first time you've heard about campaign for a fair transfer. In 2011, Opal worked with members of this board and other dependent actors to make the proposal have the lowest fiscal impact possible. TriMet even chartered a study around the issue, but unfortunately the only relevant ridership data available at the time was from 1994, a time when bus service was much higher and there was not the robust MAX system we currently enjoy. It's time to take another serious look at transfer times. Not everyone can afford access to TriMet services. A monthly pass is a large commitment for working class families. This isn't just a recession anymore, it's a depression. Tough economic times has been the reality for far too many households. So during a time of seemingly never-ending belt-tightening and hand-wringing over budgets, transit access just isn't something that riders can sacrifice. What does transit access mean? Transit isn't just about getting somewhere for the sake of getting there. It means getting there so that you can do something. So you can work, play, visit, shop, or in other words, live life in a meaningful manner. The campaign for a fair transfer means that instead of planning a whole day around one trip, which ends up at a single destination, one can meaningfully get somewhere and do something and not worry about getting stranded or how to budget for another fare. The irony of today is that I'll have spent $5 to give my testimony here. The time it took me to travel from my home in Southeast Portland to this room in Hillsborough was just barely covered by a single ticket. It took me 2 hours, and that's with on-time transfers and no quick stops. As a cash ticket user, I'm continually having to think so far ahead to ensure that you can either get as many rides and errands as possible done on a single ticket, or having to budget my day around the cost of a day pass. Campaign for a fair transfer is a solution generated by riders, supported by drivers, which will boost ridership and add immediate value to our sagging transit system. Portland and TriMet at one point enjoyed the distinction of being among the nation's #1 public transit systems. How far we've come from that point. We, as bus riders, want to work with you on creating the most affordable and efficient transit service that is, again, a point of civic pride for Portland residents. The campaign for a fair transfer is a starting point for TriMet to start restoring value in our system. It's a solid first step as a signal to the public at large that this agency is here to serve their transportation needs. Opal and Bus Riders United look forward to working with you to do so. The opportunity for TriMet to be #1 again is not lost. Let's get there without leaving bus riders behind. Thank you for your time.
Nice job in your inaugural testimony. Questions?
Yeah, I do have a quick question. Maybe you can cue us in on this. A couple of comments this morning from Bus Riders United and Opal specifically stated that TriMet is the most expensive. One person said the most expensive, and another person said one of the highest in the nation. I paid $9 in Washington, D.C. to ride the transit system for a daily pass. How does that compare to the statements that were made this morning from Opal and Bus Riders United representatives?
The information that I know is that $250 is currently the cost of a single fare, and that is on par with New York's system. So for a single ride, $250, ours is just as high as New York, so it's one of the highest in the nation. I believe Chicago, where I'm originally from, has also currently is about to raise it to $250 as well.
But then on a daily rate, I guess that's where the departure turns, or maybe it's because of peak time usage.
Perhaps other transit systems may use those sort of peak travel times rates, but I'm not one to speak to that.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
I actually thought I had one more person to talk to sign up to testify on this issue, but that person is on another later resolution. So is there anybody else in the audience, I don't want to cut this off because this is a very valuable discussion, that wanted to provide input on the budget who's not yet provided that input on the budget? Please come on up.
Wow. Good morning, board members, Mr. McFarland. One thing that I was concerned about.
Please identify yourself.
Oh yes, my name is Alex Hawk. I live in Steve Clark's district in Tigard. I live right off of the 94 and I live off of the 76, formerly the 12. And both the 94 and the 76, like I said last time, the service there is atrocious and the ridership is there to make it profitable. Right now, the cost per boarding ride for the 76 is $2.46, and we're not providing adequate service between Beaverton Transit Center and Tualatin Meridian Park Hospital. The service for the 76 ends in broad daylight at 6:45. The last trip to Beaverton Transit Center is at 6:45 from Meridian Park, and that's it. For someone like me who commutes a lot downtown and who has a 76 stop closest to me, it's not the greatest thing in the world, and especially with the transfer times late night at Tigard Transit Center between the 94 and the 12. Especially since the 94 is every half an hour and turns to hourly service at night. So it doesn't make sense to keep cutting bus service in favor of rail service, and we keep saying that we're not cutting bus service in favor of MAX, but it's very obvious that we are, because we keep the 94, the 12, and now the 21, I guess, which is a brand new line, got brand new, or excuse me, those all got cut, or we had to make a bunch of transfers, but we still have West Commuter Rail, which, to my